My name is Eleanor Vance, and for 42 years, I was the heart of the Verdant Page, a rare bookstore tucked away on a cobbled side street where the world moved slower, softer, and far more deliberately than anywhere else in the city. If you had walked past its narrow green door and ducked under the stained glass skylight, you'd have stepped into a space that smelled of cedar polish, lavender, sachets, and the faint musk of old leather bindings. People said stepping inside felt like slipping out of time, but they were wrong about one thing. It wasn't the shop that bent time, it was me. I remembered every edition that passed through those mahogany shelves, every marginal note made by a century-dead scholar, every watermark and signature that proved a book's soul was authentic. I didn't just sell books. I guarded history, one fragile spine at a time. Robert, my husband, was the smile customers remembered. He shook hands, told witty anecdotes, flirted gently with patrons who liked being charmed, and gave interviews to glossy magazines about the romance of literature. He loved being photographed in a tweed jacket, leaning against the rolling library ladder as if he had just descended from Olympus with the wisdom of Milton and Shakespeare tucked under his arm. What no one ever noticed was that Robert couldn't tell the difference between a true first edition and a well-forged counterfeit. People imagine I whispered as fire to him before the sale. He was an actor that burns both victim was the stage and actor. But for me, was the face. It was different. It was precise. For years, surgical. I told myself a lesson delivered in the very currency, a balancing of strengths. Robert valued most, and perhaps in reputation, the early days, profit. He brought people through the door. Instead, I gave them reasons to stay, and yet, but over time, Orchid remained as the city grew noisier and shinier, not as a warning, Robert, but as a reminder. He wanted recognition not beyond the most beautiful bloom. He wanted to be envied, applauded. That pride without respect garden fragile. That betrayal, and he found his ladder to that higher customers in his pause before it. His Majesty, he called it, and then move on. A rare den curiosity. Its petals twisted like ribbons. Their whispers becoming word of mouth. Its that keeps the shop alive and magnificent. It is a strange thing. He bought it at an auction from tragedy. I had warned him. But against an absurd extravagance measured life, and he insisted it was I merely gave him his final lesson. And to my surprise, and Eleanor Vance, he wasn't entirely guardian of the Verdant Page. The Orchid became his obsession, never be erased. His calling card into high society. Invitations poured in from botanical circles, aristocratic garden clubs, and exclusive exhibitions. Robert, the man who never watered a houseplant in his life, suddenly spoke of soil pH and light cycles, as though he'd been born in a greenhouse. He even won prizes. Every ribbon fed his vanity. The bookstore faded into the background. The Orchid became his stage. And then came Chloe. She was young, maybe with hair the color of summer honey and eyes too eager for her own good. She came to us as an apprentice, or so Robert said. A bright student of literature, who could bring fresh energy to the shop at first. I tried to believe him. She did handle customers well, her laughter like a string of bells that made even the dullest browser linger. But she didn't know books, not really. She shelved poetry beside philosophy, misfiled Austen under Brontë, and once nearly sold a facsimile of a rare 17th century folio to a collector as if it were the genuine article. She wasn't there for the books, and I knew it. She was there for Robert. Or rather, Robert was there for her. I caught the glances first, his hand brushing hers as he showed her how to tally accounts, the way her lips parted when he leaned too close, the faint, guilty hush that always followed when I entered a room. My chest hollowed out slowly, day by day, until the truth was impossible to ignore. Robert, my husband of nearly half a century, was having an affair with the apprentice I had once welcomed with tea and scones. But betrayal of the flesh, bitter as it was, wasn't what nearly destroyed me. No, the real poison was tucked inside a hollowed-out copy of Paradise Lost, of all books, a business proposal, carefully folded and hidden, as if Milton's epic could absolve its treachery. It was addressed to a developer, detailing the sale of the very building that housed the Verdant Page. My building, my family's legacy. Mahogany shelves, skylight ledgers, archives all of it. Robert and Chloe had planned to dissolve the business, pocket the fortune, and cast me aside with nothing more than a severance package. I cannot explain the feeling of reading those words. It was as though every vein in my body turned to glass. My hands shook, but my vision sharpened. I saw not just what they were planning, but what it meant. They weren't just betraying my marriage. They were erasing me, erasing everything I had built. They wanted to gut my cathedral of books, my sanctuary, and replace it with polished, steel and glass apartments for people who never read anything longer than a text message. My life's work sold like a piece of old furniture. That night, I sat alone in the greenhouse, staring at His Majesty. Its twisted petals glowed faintly in the moonlight, grotesque and beautiful. Robert had placed all his pride, all his ambition, into this fragile bloom. It was his talisman, his passport, his altar. And as I looked at it, a thought took root, dark, steady, inevitable. Revenge should not be loud or clumsy. It should be elegant. It should speak in a language the traitor understands best. For Robert, that language was profit and loss. I began my plan quietly, almost tenderly, as though tending to a rare plant myself. Robert and Chloe had been pressuring me for months to attend a wellness retreat, thinly disguised as concern for my health. But I knew what it meant. They wanted me gone, out of the house, out of the way. Fine, I thought. I would give them exactly what they wanted. On the morning of my departure, I packed my bags, smiled serenely, and let Robert drive me to the station. But before I left, I made a small adjustment in the greenhouse. I watered His Majesty not with nutrients, but with a clear, potent industrial dye I had sourced through one of our restoration contacts, harmless to the plant itself, but utterly impossible to wash away. Invisible at first, it would reveal its true nature in time. As the train pulled away, I imagined Robert rushing home to call Chloe, to celebrate my absence. I imagined them in the greenhouse, him preening, her laughing, and between them, the orchid still proud, still radiant, unaware of the trap it held in its veins, and I felt no guilt, only a cold, steady satisfaction. From my hotel room across town, I waited. I didn't pace or wring my hands. Instead, I poured myself a glass of wine and opened a worn copy of Middlemarch. Patience had always been my greatest strength, and now it was my sharpest weapon. On the side table sat a small tablet. The feed came from the discreet moisture sensor camera I'd embedded in the orchid's pot weeks before. Robert thought it was merely another of his precious gadgets, something to track watering schedules. He never suspected it was my window into his downfall. The first hours passed in silence. The orchid swayed in its cradle of light, each petal glistening faintly as though already trembling with secrets. Then Robert entered the greenhouse, Chloe trailing behind like a shadow stitched to his heels. I watched as he gestured proudly toward His Majesty, his voice swelling, his arms sweeping dramatically, as though he were unveiling a masterpiece. Chloe's laughter rang out, bright and careless, as she leaned into him, her hand brushing his sleeve. I watched them kiss among the leaves, careless, clumsy, their passion oblivious to the fragile pedestal on which Robert's ego rested. He pulled her closer, knocking into the stand. For a heartbeat, everything slowed, the orchid tipping, the pot wobbling on its edge, and then came the crash. Soil and shards exploded across the tiled floor. The petals of His Majesty splayed helplessly in the dirt. The dye had done its work. Where once the orchid had been a crown of magenta and green, now it was streaked with garish electric blue. The color clung to every bloom like a curse, shimmering in the greenhouse light. Robert froze, his mouth open in a silent howl. Before a sound ripped from him, raw, primal, desperate, Chloe staggered back, horror etched on her face. As Robert fell to his knees in the wreckage, I should have felt triumph in that moment. But what I felt instead was colder, deeper, inevitability. This was what betrayal cost. This was the price of arrogance. I recorded every second. The live stream went out not to the world at large, but to a very particular audience. The entire Horticultural Society's mailing list. Collectors, judges, rivals, patrons, all of them received the footage in real time. Within minutes, my phone buzzed with notifications. Have you seen this? Is this real? My God, Robert Vance. The scandal spread like fire in a dry forest. By dawn, Robert's reputation was ash. He wasn't just disqualified. From the upcoming Royal Flora exhibition, he was barred. From every serious competition, his peers mocked him openly, gleefully sharing clips of his anguished wail, pants half undone, while Chloe scrambled for her dress in the background. Overnight, himself on sophistication became the punchline of every whispered joke. When I returned home 2 days later, suitcase in hand, I found him sitting in the living room with the curtains drawn. His face was pale, his eyes bloodshot, his hands trembling. Chloe was gone, of course. She was. Opportunists don't linger when the ladder collapses. Robert looked up at me, shame burning in his gaze, but I met it with nothing more than cool pity. I saw the video, I said softly. The whole city has. He tried to speak, to explain, but no words came. I set the divorce papers on the table between us. His eyes widened, then narrowed, then filled with tears, but I didn't flinch. The prenuptial agreement, once dismissed by him as a quaint precaution, was now my shield. The bookstore, the building, the assets all mine. He was left with nothing. Not the Orchid, not the apprentice, not the legacy. He signed without protest. What else could he do? His name was a laughingstock. His ambitions shattered. He no longer had leverage. He was a man stripped bare. In the weeks that followed, I rebuilt. The Verdant Page thrummed with life again. Customers returned, curious about the scandal, but lingering for the comfort of the shelves. The gentle hum of stories waiting to be discovered. I hired a new assistant, a sharp literature student who asked thoughtful questions and listened with reverence. She didn't flirt with customers. She cared about books, and for the first time in years, I felt hope humming through the walls. But I wasn't cruel enough to erase Robert entirely. In a small locked display case near the register, I placed a single preserved bloom from His Majesty's electric blue, its twisted petals frozen in time. Beneath it, a brass placard read, "A lesson in impermanence." Customers often stopped to marvel at it, snapping photos, asking questions. They didn't know the whole story, but they understood enough. Pride, obsessional, of it fades, and when it fades, it leaves only truth. The Orchid became our most popular attraction. Drawing in curious visitors from across the city, business surged. The Verdant Page wasn't just surviving, it was thriving, brighter and bolder than ever. Robert, meanwhile, vanished from society's stage. I heard whispers of him nursing his humiliation in small rented rooms, occasionally spotted at a bar, older, frailer. His charm wasted on an audience that no longer cared. He had gambled everything on glory and lost it all. Sometimes, late at night, I would walk through the shop, running my fingers along the spines of the books, listening to the silence settle like a cloak. I thought about the years I had given, the sacrifices I had made, the trust I had extended, and I thought about how quickly it had been betrayed, yet I did not regret my revenge. I had not acted in rage, but in clarity. I had simply returned the balance, restored the scales. People imagine revenge as fire, as explosion, as something that burns both victim and victor. But for me, it was different. It was precise, surgical. A lesson delivered in the very currency Robert valued most: reputation, profit. He wanted to erase me. Instead, I erased him. And yet, the Orchid remains not as a trophy, not as a warning, but as a reminder that nothing, not even the most beautiful bloom, endures forever. That pride without respect is fragile. That betrayal carries a cost. Customers pause before it, reflect, and then move on. their curiosity feeding into sales, their whispers becoming word of mouth that keeps the shop alive. It is a strange thing to profit from tragedy. But then again, Robert always measured life and profit. I merely gave him his final lesson. And Eleanor Vance, guardian of the Verdant Page, will never be erased. The city has a way of moving on quickly, but scandals linger like smoke in the rafters. In the weeks after Robert's downfall, I watched as his name slid from headlines into footnotes. From whispered gossip to tired anecdotes. People love a fall from grace, but they love novelty even more. And soon enough, there were new scandals, new embarrassments to feast on. Yet, among those who mattered, the collectors, the literary elite, his name remained tarnished beyond repair. For them, memory was longer, sharper. They would never forget the sight of Robert Vance groveling on the greenhouse floor, undone not by sin of flesh but by the ruin of a flower. Inside the Verdant Page, however, time took on a different rhythm. The shop became a sanctuary again, humming with the rustle of pages, the murmur of conversations, the joy of discovery. It wasn't just a bookstore. It was a stage where people came to find pieces of themselves hidden in ink and parchment. I moved among the shelves with renewed vigor, guiding students toward forgotten poets, placing first editions into the hands of collectors who treated them like relics, watching as a young couple fell in love over a shared copy of Virginia Woolf. Day reminded me that books are more than objects, they are anchors. They keep us steady in a world intent on sweeping us away. The new apprentice, Margaret, was nothing like Chloe. She was serious, deliberate, with an almost scholarly curiosity that reminded me of myself at her age. She asked about watermarks, about the subtle differences between printings, about the history of bindings. She wasn't there for glamour or charm. She was there to learn. And I, perhaps, for the first time in decades, felt the quiet thrill of teaching someone who truly cared. It was not lost on me that in nurturing her, I was planting seeds for a legacy that might endure long after I was gone. One evening, as the golden light of dusk spilled across the shelves, Margaret lingered by the display case holding the electric blue orchid. "It's beautiful," she whispered, "and tragic." I studied her face, the way her eyes seemed to hold both wonder and sorrow. "That's the thing about beauty," I said. "It doesn't always last, but the story it leaves behind that can endure." She looked at me then, really looked, as though she sensed the weight of truth behind my words. I did not tell her the whole tale, not yet. Some lessons must be earned with time. Still, the orchid's presence gave the Verdant Page a peculiar mystique. Tourists came in just to see it, snapping photographs, spinning theories about its origin. Some whispered it was cursed. Others claimed it was a rare hybrid. I let them wonder. The mystery drew them in, and once inside, the books did the rest. Business boomed in a way it hadn't in years, and I knew, with a quiet certainty, that the shop would outlive me. But while I thrived, Robert withered. From acquaintances, I heard fragments. He tried to join another botanical society and was turned away. He attempted to sell His Majesty's remains, but found no buyers. He even gave a lecture at a community center, but half the audience snickered through it. Pride had been his lifeblood, and now it was gone. Once, I saw him across the street, standing in the rain outside the shop. He didn't come in. He simply watched, shoulders hunched, face shadowed beneath his hat. For a fleeting moment, I felt the sting of pity. We had shared a life once, shared laughter and plans, ordinary moments that weave a marriage together. But pity is not forgiveness, and I turned away before he could see me notice him. I sometimes wonder what drives a person to betrayal. Was it greed? Vanity? The thrill of conquest? For Robert, perhaps it was all three. For Chloe, I suspect it was the shimmer of opportunity, the promise of wealth and status. Together, they fed each other's hunger until it consumed them both, and in the end, they destroyed themselves. My hand merely nudged the inevitable. What people rarely understand about revenge is that it is not always about rage. Mine was not. It was about precision, about reminding Robert Tand, perhaps, reminding myself that actions have consequences, that legacies are not stolen so easily, that those who underestimate the quiet ones do so at their peril. I had been the invisible half of our marriage, the uncredited custodian of knowledge and tradition, but invisibility is not weakness. Sometimes it is power waiting to be revealed. And so life settled into a new rhythm. Days filled with the shuffle of customers, nights with the soft rustle of pages beneath lamplight. Margaret blossomed under my guidance, her confidence growing as she mastered the craft. The Verdant Page was alive again, not just as a store, but as a beacon, a reminder that in a world obsessed with speed and spectacle, there was still value in patience, in depth, in the weight of words. Yet sometimes, late at night, when the shop was silent and the streets outside echoed with distant footsteps, I found myself standing before the orchid, staring at its twisted, blue-stained petals. They seemed to glow faintly in the dark, like veins of lightning frozen in bloom, and I would think about impermanence, about how quickly beauty fades, about how fragile all things truly are. Books decay, flowers wilt, people betray, but stories as stories endure. And mine, though born of bitterness, was now woven into the fabric of this place. Perhaps one day, long after I am gone, someone will tell the tale of Eleanor Vance, the bookseller who turned betrayal into triumph, whose revenge bloomed in electric blue. Perhaps they will not know the details, only the legend, and that is enough. For what is history, if not the stories we choose to preserve? As I locked the shop one evening, the streetlights flickering on, I felt a strange peace settle over me. The war was over, the scales were balanced, and the Verdant Page, my sanctuary, my cathedral of words, was safe once more. The bookstore had always been my refuge, but after Robert's departure, it became my rebirth. I woke each morning with purpose, not dread. The stillness of the early hours, when the city had yet to stir, belonged to me alone. I would open the shutters and let the first shafts of sunlight spill across the wooden floors, dust motes dancing like tiny spirits among the shelves. In those moments, I felt like the custodian of something eternal, as though the books themselves breathed through me, grateful for my devotion. Customers noticed the change too. They lingered longer, sensing a warmth in the air, a quiet joy in the way I greeted them, guided them, remembered their names. The Verdant Page had always been beloved, but now it thrummed with a new kind of energy, vibrant. I realized then that Robert's presence, though outwardly charming, had been a shadow across the shop. His hunger for attention had stifled its soul. Without him, the store seemed to inhale freely again, every corner brighter, every page more alive. Margaret grew into her role with surprising speed. She cataloged with precision, corrected her early mistakes, and even began suggesting rare acquisitions I might otherwise have overlooked. One afternoon, she timidly proposed we host readings, a small gathering of local poets and students who could share their work. At first I hesitated. The Verdant Page had never been about performance. It had been about preservation. But something in her earnestness moved me, and I agreed. The first reading was modest in chairs arranged between the shelves, a pot of tea simmering at the counter, the faint rain tapping against the windows. But as the words poured out raw, hopeful, trembling, the shop seemed to come alive in a way I hadn't anticipated. Those gathered leaned close, listening, sharing, connecting. When it was over, no one wanted to leave. They lingered, talking in low voices, browsing the shelves with fresh eyes. Margaret beamed, her face lit with pride, and I knew then that she had been right. The Verdant Page was not just a temple to the past. It could also be a cradle for the future. As word spread, the readings grew. Soon, our little gatherings became monthly events, then weekly. The shop filled with voices, some seasoned, some breaking with nerves, all spilling truths onto the air. I watched from the sidelines, heart swelling. As the store became more than mine alone, it became a community. And yet, Even as life blossomed within those walls, the specter of Robert lingered beyond them. I heard of him occasionally, always secondhand, always tinged with disdain. He tried to sell trinkets, attempted to broker deals in circles that had once courted him, but the doors remained closed. His Majesty, the Orchid, had been his key to that kingdom, and now the kingdom had locked him out. Without the bloom, without the charm of triumph, he was just another aging man with nothing to offer. There are nights when I dream of Robert not as he was at the end, broken and humiliated, but as he once was in the beginning, a man who loved me, or at least believed he did, a man who walked with me through the shelves, who carried boxes of books with a grin, who once whispered promises beneath the skylight. Sometimes I wake with tears on my cheeks, mourning a version of us that never truly existed. But the grief passes, as all feelings do, and I rise to face another day. No feeling is final. And if my life is now defined by impermanence, then so be it. For within impermanence lies freedom, the freedom to rebuild, to redefine, to begin again. The following morning arrived quietly, with sunlight pouring in through the bookstore's tall windows, painting golden rectangles across the wooden floor. Eleanor sat at her desk, surrounded by stacks of books, still waiting to be shelved, but her mind was elsewhere. The memories from last night lingered with her like mist. She had not dreamed, at least not in the usual sense. What she experienced was more vivid, more consuming than any dream could ever be. The voices she had heard, those strange fragments of conversation, remained lodged in her mind. They were not random whispers, but deliberate messages, though their meaning was cloaked in ambiguity. Not yet. Wait until the hour comes. She replayed the phrase over and over again, as if the repetition might unlock its hidden purpose. Each time, she grew more certain that this was no hallucination born of fatigue. This was something real, something external, reaching out to her. Her logical mind resisted. She was a woman of literature, of analysis, not of superstition. And yet, what logic could she lean upon when the evidence was etched so deeply into her senses? Logic could not account for the way the shelves had trembled in unison, or the moment the shadows had twisted into recognizable shapes. A knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. She quickly rose and pulled it open to reveal Mr. Langley, the old caretaker of the neighboring building. He was carrying his usual satchel of papers and looked unusually grave. "Morning, Miss Vance," he said with a polite nod. "I was passing by and thought I should check in on you. The nights in this part of town have been restless lately." "Restless?" Eleanor asked, trying to mask the unease in her voice. "Aye," Langley replied. "Strange noises echoing down the alleys, shadows moving where none should be. Folk whisper that the past has begun to stir. I don't mean to trouble you, but you might want to be cautious. A place as old as this bookstore tends to collect memories, good and bad alike." Eleanor felt a chill crawl up her spine. Langley's words. She invited him inside for tea, hoping perhaps he might share more. As they sat across from each other, the steam rising between their cups, Langley told her of the building's history. The Verdant Page was not always a bookstore, he explained. Long ago, it served as a meeting hall, a gathering place for thinkers, dreamers, and sometimes darker souls. Some claimed rituals were held here, rites to preserve knowledge not meant for ordinary folk. Whether that's true or not, the air still remembers. You can feel it. Eleanor's hands tightened around her cup. "Do you believe the past can truly echo into the present?" Langley looked at her with steady eyes. "I believe the walls hold stories, and sometimes those stories demand to be told again. The question is, are you listening, Miss Vance?" The caretaker's visit left Eleanor shaken. His words seemed to confirm what she had already begun to suspect. Her experiences were not a product of imagination, but rather the result of something older, something deeply rooted in the very bones of the building. That evening, she returned to the shelves with renewed determination. If the bookstore contained secrets, she began examining the older books with a meticulous eye. searching for annotations, hidden symbols, anything that might connect to the visions she had seen. Her efforts were rewarded sooner than expected. Behind a row of thick tomes on natural philosophy, she discovered a leather-bound journal, its spine cracked with age. There was no title on the cover, only a faded emblem of an intertwined serpent and quill. She opened it carefully, and as the pages turned, the scent of aged ink and parchment filled the air. The journal was written in a hand both elegant and hurried, as though its author had been racing against time to capture their thoughts. The entries spoke of gatherings held within the bookstore centuries ago. Scholars and mystics had come together, seeking not just knowledge but communion with forces beyond ordinary comprehension. They believed the bookstore stood at a threshold, a place where the fabric of reality grew thin, allowing glimpses into what lay beyond. One entry in particular seized Eleanor's attention. The Verdant Page is more than walls and shelves. It is a vessel, a conduit. Those who dwell within its silence may hear voices not their own. Beware, for not all who whisper do so with kindness. Some seek only to claim the listener. The words struck her with terrifying clarity. Was she the new listener? Had the bookstore chosen her? Suddenly, the air shifted. A faint rustling filled the room, though no wind stirred. The books themselves seemed to lean closer, their spines arching as if straining to hear her breath. Eleanor felt the presence again, stronger now, pressing against her thoughts. She clutched the journal to her chest, whispering to herself, "I will not be claimed. I will understand." The resolve in her voice did not banish the shadows, but it steadied her heart. For the first time, she realized that her role was not passive. The bookstore demanded something of her, and she would not shrink away. Still, as she prepared for another sleepless night among the shelves, she could not ignore the gnawing fear that understanding might come at a cost she was not yet prepared to pay. The whispers began anew as the clock neared midnight, and Eleanor braced herself. This time, she would listen. The night descended swiftly, bringing with it a silence that felt heavier than before. Eleanor sat in the heart of the bookstore, the journal open on her lap, a single lamp casting its glow across the pages. The shadows it created seemed alive, stretching and curling as though they sought to reach her. The whispers began softly, almost coaxing, fragmented syllables strung together in no recognizable language. Yet, beneath the strangeness, there was an undeniable cadence, like a song half remembered. Eleanor leaned forward, her breath shallow, straining to decipher the meaning. Then, clear words emerged. "Turn the page." Her fingers trembled as she obeyed, flipping to the final entry of the journal. What she found made her blood run cold. The handwriting was jagged, desperate. To the one who finds this, the Verdant Page is alive. It remembers every voice, every secret, every sin spoken within its walls. I thought I could master it. I was wrong. It listens, it learns, and it hungers. If you hear the voices know, you are chosen. But chosen for what? I cannot say. Beware the bargain it offers, for once accepted, there is no release. Eleanor's pulse quickened. A bargain? The thought struck like lightning. Could this be what the voices wanted all along? Not just to be heard, but to be answered? The air grew thick, oppressive. Books rattled softly against their shelves. From the corner of her vision, shadows lengthened into figures, their outlines flickering like candle flames. They did not step forward, but she felt their attention, their collective gaze pressing against her very soul. A voice rose above the rest, deeper and clearer, resonating through her chest as though it bypassed her ears entirely. "Eleanor Vance, will you keep our stories? Will you bind us within you, so we may never be forgotten?" Her throat went dry. She wanted to scream, to deny them, but another part of her curious yearning, perhaps even reverent, hesitated. What was the price? What would it mean to say yes? She closed her eyes and whispered, "What happens if I refuse?" The shadows shuddered, and the whisper became a hiss, and silence is the cruelest death. The temperature dropped suddenly, frost blooming across the glass of the windows. Eleanor's breath hung visible in the air. Her heart hammered. She realized she had no true choice. The bookstore's hunger would not allow refusal. Taking a steadying breath, she placed her hand upon the open journal. "If I must keep your stories," she said, her voice quivering yet resolute, "then I will, but on my terms. You will not own me, I will own the telling." For a moment, the room was utterly still. Then, the shadows recoiled, folding back into the shelves. The rattling ceased. The frost melted. A heavy silence fell, not oppressive, but waiting. The lamp's flame steadied, and Eleanor felt a strange calm wash over her. She had not banished the presence, but she had claimed a measure of power within it. The bookstore was no longer merely a place she inhabited. It was now bound to her, and she to it. She closed the journal with a decisive snap, set it upon the desk, and whispered into the silence, "But neither will mine." Outside, dawn crept over the horizon, spilling light into the city streets. Within the Verdant Page, Eleanor stood tall, her shadow long across the floor. She was no longer simply its keeper. She was its voice, and though the whispers would never cease, she knew they no longer sought to consume her. They sought to be remembered. The cost, she suspected, would reveal itself in time, but for now, she had one.